Okay, good afternoon and good morning to everyone from coast to coast, and welcome to today's webinar, Making the Case for Campus Sustainability. My name is Eric Nolan. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Sightlines. I will also be your moderator for today's session, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to say that we have another sizable audience with us today. We have hundreds of facilities, sustainability, and business officers from institutions across North America, and we're thrilled to be spending this time with each and every one of you. Today's session will feature Heather Finnegan. Heather is the Product Manager for Sustainability at Sightlines and also a certified sustainability professional. Heather's agenda for today will focus on the challenge of navigating competing priorities on campus and how business officers and sustainability professionals can interact to find those win-wins. Heather will also explore how to leverage sustainability initiatives to improve both your institution's financial health and reputation. Lastly, we'll set aside some time at the end of the presentation to respond to any questions or comments that are submitted along the way or that were submitted prior to today's session. With this in mind, I'd like to remind you all that if you have any questions or comments during the presentation for either Heather or myself, please don't hesitate to share those with us as you think of them. We'd like this to be an interactive session, and we very much look forward to answering any questions that come up along the way. I'll be monitoring them throughout the presentation, and as I mentioned before, we'll do our best to address each and every one of them towards the end of the presentation. To submit a question or comment, simply enter into the questions box on your control panel, and they will be sent directly to us. To continue with the housekeeping notes and to really answer one question up front that we typically receive, following today's session, each of you will receive an email that contains links to both the presentation slides and webinar recording for your continued engagement with this material. We'll also be sure to include some complimentary content that we think you might find valuable. So keep an eye out for that email tomorrow. I'd also like to call your attention to the handouts section on your control panel. Handouts gives you instant access to the complimentary resources such as previous webinar presentations, best practice guides, trends and benchmarking reports, and you'll also find a case study from Fort Lewis College about how they were able to leverage sustainability reporting data to bring campus stakeholders together. You can check those out at any time during the session, and we absolutely encourage you to do so. Now, before I hand this off to Heather, I'd like to quickly provide a short introduction to Sightlines for those who are joining us for the first time today. The way I like to describe us is that we're the leading investment advisor for educational facilities. We're working with hundreds of institutions every year to try to help them find ways that they can use their capital more strategically and also identify opportunities to be more effective stewards of their campus, both financially and environmentally. Using our leading database of verified facilities and metrics allows us to do this as we're able to help finance, facilities, and sustainability professionals make more informed, data-driven decisions about the future of their most valuable assets. And we've been honored to work with hundreds of institutions across North America every year. We work with approximately 450 colleges and universities in 43 states and Canada. And this really gives us unparalleled perspective on the state of higher education facilities and industry trends and best practices. And it's really that perspective that is going to play a big role in what Heather is going to be talking about today during today's session. So with that, I will wrap up here and pass it off to Heather to get us started. So take it away, Heather.
Thank you for that introduction, Eric, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to having your questions and feedback throughout the conversation, so please feel free to use that window to share your ideas and questions as we move through. I'm hoping to start today's presentation with a quick overview of the sustainability services we offer at Sightlines. These are threefold. So we work with some of our members to do sustainability benchmarking, which is a greenhouse gas inventory plus 60+ additional benchmarks and longitudinal trends. We work with others for sustainability reporting for institutions that report to STARS, Sierra Club, or Princeton Review and are looking for third-party support to lift some of that administrative burden. And then finally, we work with some of our members to work towards creating comprehensive sustainability or climate action plans. The reason that this is relevant to today's webinar content is that through these three services, we work with dozens and dozens of institutions every year to both manage their data from a sustainability perspective and give recommendations for the path forward and help them create that strategic roadmap. So through those interactions and that large database, we've come to spend a lot of time with our members talking about how they can best engage with diverse colleagues across the institution on matters related to sustainability. And this theme has been very relevant in recent conversations with our group because earlier this year I attended the ASHE retreat, which is an annual event that brings together sustainability professionals. And there was this theme running through the retreat that I thought was very interesting about how to really communicate and build coalitions across campus. And personally, I've been spending a lot of time in the Yale Climate Change Communication website, reading about the research that they had been doing and how it might relate to this question that sustainability professionals are posing more and more about how we are communicating with these folks from different worldviews. And in that Yale climate change research, they really identify 6 distinct categories, or they call it the global warming 6 Americas, of individuals and their perspective about how they look at global warming or climate change information. And what you see on the far left here is that just 17% of the population is deeply alarmed about climate change. And what that means is that those folks both support a national response and they take daily, regular, personal action towards combating that issue of global warming. Now, what's really interesting is that the next biggest group of individuals in this survey are those that consider themselves to be either concerned or cautious about climate change and global warming. Now, these folks believe in global warming, they believe it's happening, but it's not an urgent matter in their day-to-day lives. And that's because they are focused on other topics, other things that they are alarmed about in their day-to-day life. Meanwhile, the smallest percent of the population falls into this doubtful and dismissive category. So in the past, a lot of time was spent in the sustainability world thinking about how we're going to move these doubtful and dismissive folks over to the alarmed and concerned buckets. But more recently, what I'm finding when I speak to my colleagues who are on campus and really pushing for sustainability initiatives is that the biggest obstacle they have is that most of the folks on campus actually fall in these middle buckets where they believe in global warming, they believe it's an issue, but there's other priorities that are sort of zapping their energy, if you will. And the work that Yale Climate Communications Group has done has really proven this point. So on this chart, it shows that for each of those 6 subcategories, how many of the respondents are paying a lot of attention to information about global warming. And this is one of the most surprising features of their research is that even those that are alarmed about climate change, that it's a driving force and something they make decisions about in their day-to-day life, only half of those folks say that they're paying a lot of attention to the information that's coming out. And when you get into any other category, less than 20% of individuals are paying a lot of attention to this information. So many of the buzzwords that sustainability-minded professionals use about emissions and reducing the carbon footprint and limiting environmental impacts go right over folks' heads. They're just not paying a lot of attention to that information. Why is that? I think this cartoon really perfectly surmises the situation. My desire to be well-informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane. The truth is that all of us have information catapulting at us minute by minute, and it's impossible to be deeply alarmed about every bit of information that's coming your way. So there's a shift in this train of thought, I feel, amongst a lot of folks, where instead of trying to bombard folks with more information about the global warming and using the standard buzzwords of the sustainability world, instead meeting people where they're at, understanding where your colleagues, where the folks that you need to get buy-in from stand and what they're alarmed about. So I start to think about this in terms of coalition building, because we all know that to get any project off the ground in higher ed, you need to build a coalition, a team that's behind that project. And in many cases, what we're going to be talking about today is the overlap between what sustainability professionals are alarmed about and what would be considered a win against those challenges, and the obstacles and concerns of business officers and what would be considered a win for that group. and thinking about how we can find this beautiful middle ground where the things that sustainability folks are most alarmed about, like the environmental footprint, excuse me, like reducing energy consumption on campus, etc., can align with what the business officers are most alarmed about. But to do that, it's very helpful to go into the sphere of alarm and what is the win for these other individuals. Kind of take yourself out of what's important from your background and think about what others are most concerned about when they're making decisions. So to do this from the business officer perspective, what we've done is pull together some of the research that's out there right now from independent surveys and data collection agencies. In this case, this is a result of a survey from Inside Higher Education in which they were seeking information about what business officers are most alarmed about. And here's the responses that they received. Business officers are alarmed about the financial sustainability over the next decade. That's really short term, a much shorter time frame than we're usually thinking about when we talk about climate change. Business officers are alarmed about debt. A lot of campuses are worried about the debt ceiling and the load that they're carrying at the moment and what it will mean for their long-term prosperity. They're alarmed about how they're going to engage faculty in making tough decisions. Because of the financial strain, many institutions know that there's tough decisions ahead, and through that process need to get buy-in towards making those tough decisions. They're concerned about enrollment, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the coming moments, because the concerns around enrollment are very often the root cause of why institutions are struggling with these financial concerns. Business officers are alarmed about the transparency of their business decisions, again, getting buy-in, having folks understand why tough decisions are made, and concerned about failing academic programs, because at the core of the mission of the institution is educating students. So cumulatively, even though these folks are mostly responsible for the distribution and management of financial resources across the institution, they are also deeply concerned about that core mission of making sure there's academic success. Now, part of that study asks the question, are business officers reading the news, and do they find press reports accurate? And this question really stems from the idea that lately in the news, there's been article titles like this: "The decade ahead promises great change in higher education." The headlines say things like, "Higher education, enrollment on the decline," "Performance down, spending up in educational endowments," "Higher education seeks answers to leaner years." So if you're reading the news as an outsider, you think this is an industry in trouble. And business officers, more than half, say, yes, we believe these headlines are true. And my day-to-day job, the thing I'm most alarmed about, is managing these upcoming crises. At public institutions, the reason there's so much concern about these topics is because taken nationally, when you look at the averages for what percentage of operating dollars come from what sources, you see in 2007, 63% of the dollars that were used to operate a campus on any given year were coming from appropriations, and just 37% from tuition. But that has really shifted, 10% in the last 10 years, to now almost half of the operating dollars that campuses are using to run their campus on an annual basis are coming from tuition dollars. Now, in the background of this, we have states experiencing big declines in enrollment. So 86% of the states included in this analysis, which is all of them, report that they have decreased enrollment between the period of 2011 to 2016. Just 14% of states saying that their enrollment is going up. And those are states that have promising demographics, like Texas, where there's still a large proportion of the population that is 18 or approaching that key age for entering college. Now, what this gives us is a background that enrollment is down, but more than ever, the dollars that each of those students provide are what is fueling campus operations. On the private side, the conditions are not much better. So when we look at these stacked bars, in 2007, this is your sticker price for a college education on average at a private institution. Major increase in sticker price between 2007 and 2016, but you'll see that the majority of that increase is now funded by grants and aid, and a smaller proportion of the overall price tag is actual tuition dollars. At the same time, private four-year enrollment across the country is declining. So at both public and private institutions, there's less students, more competition for those students, and significant price drivers that are going to affect the business decisions being made. The reason that all of this context matters is because of those win-win-win circles that we showed before. When building coalitions, we have found historically that trying to nudge people into being alarmed about climate change is not the solution. People are unlikely to change their natural perspective and opinions on these matters. But we can absolutely find common solutions that both solve environmental sustainability problems and the problems that business offices are looking at every day, trying to recruit students, trying to make sure that the dollars and cents from tuition and other sources line up to be able to really fund campus operations. So from a sustainability-minded perspective, what I'm encouraging is that we kind of flip the dialogue around this, and we talk about how we can basically make sure that this crisis does not go to waste. Right now, the headlines say it time and again, there's a crisis of enrollment, there's a financial crisis in higher education. How can the sustainability-minded folks that are on this call, your facilities team, your sustainability team, and your business team that believes in these sustainable ideals, communicate in such a way that it gets everyone on board, even those that are alarmed more about enrollment than they are about environmental impact? One of the key ways to do this is to think about the root cause of all of these financial strains. A lot of it comes back to making sure that campuses are able to recruit students. Having the critical mass of students on campus is what makes the financial machine turn. So how are students picking a college or university? What goes into their process? Each year, US News puts out a survey of prospective students and recently admitted students where they ask questions about whether various topics affect their decision to attend a university. And what we have here on the screen is the top 9. So on the top row there, things like academic programs, future job prospects, and availability of financial aid are the key winners. What I think is really interesting is this second row. Students choose a college based on the cost of that college, based on the campus visit, and based on the reputation of that institution. This is one of those areas, those critical 3, that second tier, that I think sustainability programs and initiatives can have a really large impact. So what we're going to do is start with this cost question. How can sustainability programs, initiatives, and personnel help manage the cost of attending a higher education institution? When we think about the costs and the operating costs on campus, one of the key drivers of that is the operation of campus facilities. And at Sightlines, we always talk about 3 main inputs from an operational perspective. Your people costs, salaries, wages, benefits, etc., which are very hard to move. Most institutions do not want to be in the business of laying people off, and in fact, because of the facilities they have, really need people to maintain and take care of them. So this is a hard place to gain traction, to really find savings. On the left is expenses, things like materials, supplies, contracted services. And in this case, almost all of these fees and costs are driven by external factors, basically the cost of goods and services on the market. Again, very hard to change when there's inflation and increasing costs year over year from these outside agencies. So historically, this third piece of it, the utilities piece of the facilities operating budget, has been where folks look the most for cost savings. This is the cost of fossil fuels, purchased electric, and water sewer. Now, everyone on the line is probably saying, yep, utility costs, that's our first line of defense, that's where we go. There have been widespread efforts in the past 10 to 15 years to really focus on reducing utility costs through both energy efficiency programs and price negotiation. Most institutions, once you reach a critical size, have either a staff member or a whole department or division responsible for energy management, focusing on finding cost savings here. So you'll be surprised to find that campuses continue to spend a great deal of their operating budget towards utilities despite all these efforts. Just how much? Let's look at the average utility costs. When we look database-wide at Sightlines, we see $2.21 being spent per each gross square foot on campus towards utilities. That means your average liberal arts institution that's running a campus of about 2 million gross square feet is spending over $4 million on their utilities each year. A mid-sized public institution of about 5 million gross square feet spending over $10 million a year. And a smallish, larger institution at 10 million gross square feet, some of our institutions are double or triple this size, are spending $22 million a year. The reason I give you those numbers is to give some perspective. When you're talking about the potential to save millions across campus, this is a real impact that can help manage and mitigate the cost of college tuition that is that big concern for prospective students. Now, the common pushback that we've heard on college campuses in recent years is, we've already tackled a lot of this. We've been trying for years, but we're still spending $4, $11, or $22 million. Why is that? What we can look at when we start to dive into the database is the trends over time. What's really happening across these different utility brackets across the country? On the water and sewer front, when we look at each institution, how much they were spending in fiscal year 7 versus how much they're spending in fiscal year 15, 3/4 of the institutions in our database have seen a significant increase in the amount that they're paying for water and sewer. Because of the aging infrastructure across the country and a greater focus on rebuilding that infrastructure, utility companies are starting to pass through the costs of rainwater management, sewage distribution, and water distribution onto customers. And we now work with many institutions that are paying more for water than they are for fossil fuels. As a result, there's a lot of opportunity and low-hanging fruit in finding efficiencies in how that water is managed, or even moving to non-potable water that can come at a lower dollar value. On the electric front, it's about half and half. More than half of our institutions are paying more now for their electricity than they were in 2007. And that's after significant efforts to decrease the consumption of electricity on campus. It's been a really huge focus for many years, and yet most of the campuses we work with are either treading water or actually spending more than they were at the start of the process. The one area of bright light is around fossil expenditures. So between 2007 and 15, just short of 70% of our campuses have actually decreased how much they're spending on fossil fuels. And that's being driven by 2 factors. First, fossil efficiency is the area where campuses have made the most ground. So in last year's State of Sustainability report and this present year's State of Sustainability report, we spent a lot of time diving into the trends of consumption across universities and colleges in America, and find that most campuses have found significant improvement in their fossil fuel efficiency. Additionally, natural gas is at a very low price right now. However, when you start to look at the predictions and what the market is going to bear in the future years around natural gas and electricity, you see that even though natural gas is at a historic low at the moment, or has been over the last several years, they're expecting a 2.5 times increase in the dollars per MMBTUs that commercial buyers will need to pay for natural gas between now and 2015, and a more than doubling of the cost of electricity during that time period. Now, a lot of folks are going to look at that as just another burden to place amongst financially strapped institutions. But as sustainability-minded folks, you look at it as an opportunity, because when costs of your fuels and your utilities go up, there's quicker payback for any project that you want to get going on campus. On the waterfront, it's hard to get dollars and cents behind what those projections look like, but I'll go back to headlines once more and show that across the news, you're seeing rising nationwide rates in water, and some calling for the change to be so significant that it's going to lead to a civil rights movement in the United States. So on all fronts, even though in 1 out of the 3 categories there has been savings in recent years, we can anticipate and build into projections for any capital investments that the costs are going to rise significantly over time. Now, what's interesting about this perspective is that often for renewable energy projects, folks are building in this possibility of rising costs into the model that they use. But you very rarely see institutions build in these projected increases in costs when looking at other capital projects on campus, like replacing systems and looking at the payback for those replacements. So the campuses that are making the most inroads and getting the most investment towards those capital infusions are making this argument that you see right here, that the costs are going to rise and we need to account for that rising cost when we model out any of our life cycle analyses for funding projects. So we work with 450 colleges each year. When I talk to my colleagues and ask them, what's the holdup? Why aren't institutions invested in finding efficiencies for their water, finding efficiencies for their fossil fuels, and finding efficiencies for their electric? What's the holdback from going all in? The 2 most common bits of pushback that we hear are around this idea, first of all, that they've already tackled all the low-hanging fruit. You might go to a campus and they say, we've already switched out our LEDs and no one is going to give us funding for a project that has a payback of more than 5 years. We're all thinking short-term solutions at the moment because of these financial crises. So I've done the low-hanging fruit and I'm stuck. That's the #1 bit of pushback I hear. The second bit of pushback I hear is that we've got so much deferred maintenance on campus that must take priority. I need to focus on that deferred maintenance before I can do I want projects. These are I need to projects. At both public and private institutions, you're seeing this growth in deferred maintenance on a $1 per square foot basis over time. Now, what I recommend and what we really spend a lot of time doing through our data analytics is shifting the conversation, coming to the decision makers and leadership with counter arguments to that pushback. And the first and foremost on the top of our tongue at any moment is, you're exactly right. You do need to tackle deferred maintenance. Now let's talk about where that deferred maintenance is on campus. On the left-hand chart, what we show is the percent spending towards target. So every institution that we work with gets a target for how much they should spend towards envelope and mechanical investment each and every year. On average, our public institutions are investing 38% of what they should be towards those systems. Our private institutions, 31% of what they should be to keep up with mechanical and envelope needs. So that means that a great deal of the deferred maintenance on campus is in categories that are natural fit for sustainability projects and initiatives. The second piece of deferred maintenance to consider is around infrastructure. Now, when I speak about infrastructure, I'm talking about all of the infrastructure and connections between buildings, right? So the distribution of steam, the distribution of chilled water, et cetera. Across our database, when we look at when campuses were built, we see 2 major peaks in construction, one around 1970, one around 2005. This 1970 peak is so important because so many buildings in higher education were built during this era, and the infrastructure that connects those buildings to central systems also was built during that time period. So now we're looking at infrastructure, distribution systems being 50 years old, reaching a very critical age and need for replacement. So when you get the pushback on campus, we can't prioritize sustainability, we need to prioritize these high-risk deferred maintenance projects. The answer is they're one and the same. A project that can help you towards a sustainability goal is also a project that can help you towards a deferred maintenance goal. In fact, the best project that you can pick on campus is one that can kill multiple birds with one stone. if you can reduce risk, reduce operating costs, and help achieve your sustainability goals, you're really talking now. That's a great project. So the next counter argument that I often encourage folks to consider when pushing for these sustainability initiatives on campus is to think about shifting the conversation around payback and return on investment. So what we have here is a scenario where you've had a performance contractor come onto campus and they've shown you a project that you could do that would have energy savings potential. And they tell you the first cost is right here. And this blue here, this operating cost, would be reduced significantly if you replaced your current system with this more sustainable system. But the payback on it is 12 years. And you think, all right, no one on campus is going to fund a 12-year payback. We just don't have the financial resources for folks to be paying to be investing in projects that have that long of a payback period. It's important, given the era that we're in of extreme deferred maintenance, that we shift the dialogue here, because the reality is that this is how much the total life cycle cost of that system would be. And in dark blue here is what you would pay to just replace the system in kind. So if this is a deferred maintenance project, you need to replace the boiler, it's going to cost you X amount. As a sustainability-minded person, maybe you want to replace that boiler with the most efficient model that makes sense for your maintenance crew. But over here, it's a 12-year payback. In reality, if you're going to replace that anyway, the differential to buy the more sustainable system is really just this part shown in blue. You get the same positive reduction in operating costs against the current system that you would, but you're looking at just the differential between straight replacement cost and more sustainable replacement cost. Now your payback is 3 years. And it's much easier to make the business case that you should invest in the slightly larger upfront cost of that more sustainable system, because you were going to replace it anyway, and the payback, once you look at just the differential, is within the realm of what your team would fund. Now, this conversation is happening every single day on campus because of all that deferred maintenance. In our recent State of Sustainability report that came out in January, we spent a lot of time talking about how sustainability-minded professionals on campus should be focusing more and more of their attention on the day-to-day maintenance, replacement, and renovation of existing buildings. That's where there's the most opportunity to really have a positive environmental impact. And each of these replacements that happens, if you can get involved in this conversation and push towards the more sustainable replacement option when replacement's already happening, you can really find some win-wins that make both sustainability sense and financial sense for your institution. The one other piece of this argument that I think can be really impactful when you're going after counter arguments is recognizing the financial advantage you have when you're pursuing either efficiency or energy projects. So in the most recent report from NACUBO, they reported over 10 years of the 10-year return on endowments has been 5% year to year. And that 5% compared to how you see some performance for money management is not as ideal as it could be, right? So that's how the stock market is returning on investment for endowments at the moment. The Intentional Endowment Network published a report a few years ago looking at true green revolving funds. These are revolving funds that only fund projects that will lead to cost savings and then reinvest those cost savings back into further capital investment to improve energy efficiency on campus. When done right, when those parameters exist around green revolving funds, you're looking at a rate of return on your money of 28%, which puts the standard stock market rate of return of 5% to shame almost. And very similar on clean energy projects, looking at rates of returns of around 15% when done right. So if there is money available on campus, but it's not being invested into efficiency projects, folks start to wonder, why aren't we investing in these projects that are a safe bet, that have really nice returns compared to how we're investing our money otherwise? And I think one of the key detractors from these types of investments is really the complication of it all. Leading up to this webinar, one of the attendees asked the question, How are campuses managing to do this? Every time that I make the recommendation that we go with a green revolving fund or make this argument about the payback of efficiency projects, the financial folks on campus kind of cringe at the complications of it all. And the truth is that there's not a simple answer here. But where I've seen institutions have success is where they look to peers, they see who has been successful, and they learn important lessons from those success stories. So for instance, Northeastern University is a great success story and something that we could all learn from. Actually chose to invest some of their endowment funds into environmental sustainability projects on campus. So they looked at this 5% rate of return and said, we can do better right here investing in ourselves. Let's do it. And they made that investment. At Ohio State University, they have recently entered into a public-private partnership for a 50-year energy contract. The premise of which is that through this public-private partnership, they feel that they can have better management of their utility infrastructure while also implementing systems that greatly improve the energy efficiency across campus. The private organization is so willing to bet on this investment that up front, as part of this contract, Ohio State University received $1 billion to invest into their own endowment. So very different tacks at Northeastern and Ohio State, but they're marked by finding creative solutions and recognizing the return on investment that comes with investing into energy projects. This last one has come out just this month, and I think it's really interesting. Australian Catholic University became the first to issue a bond under the new sustainability bond guidelines. Essentially, they have projects that they wanted to fund on campus that they knew would show returns from an energy perspective. They made the bond publicly available, and investors were actually paying a premium to invest into this bond opportunity to get them the funding that they need, because investors believe the payback is there on these energy efficiency projects. Now, given a few of the comments that we received from the folks registering for this webinar, we sense that there's a big interest in learning more and diving into some of these case studies. So in the follow-up communications that you have with Eric and with my teammates, if this is a topic that's of interest to you, please do speak up, because we may be able to dig into these case studies a little bit more and spend time with you talking about how these institutions overcame some of the typical barriers to get these projects underway. But for now, I promised you that we'd cover more than just cost. Let's think back to the beginning here about the idea that you never let a good crisis go to waste. You'll remember the crisis that we're talking about is this crisis of enrollment declines and how it's driving financial struggles in higher education. The other piece of how prospective students choose their college that we as sustainability-minded professionals can impact are these pieces of the campus visit and the campus reputation. So let's dive into that a little bit, shifting gears and thinking about the effect that we can have on influencing these two major factors in how students choose where they'll attend school. Now, those of you who have delved into this topic in the past are probably expecting that this point is going to be paramount in the conversation. One of the things I see most often cited about why sustainability programs matter is this stat from the Princeton Review. They asked, how much would campus commitment to environmental issues affect your decision to apply or attend an institution? And when it's talked about in the press, you get the statistic that this group, the 42%, the 16%, and the 6%, collectively, that more than half of students care at least somewhat about environmental issues when they're deciding what institution to attend. And campuses are responsive to this. Whenever I go on a startup as a Sightlines employee, we actually do the prospective student campus tours. And almost invariably on those tours, you get a view of some of the sustainability initiatives on campus, the green roofs, the energy portals, the organic garden. And the idea here is that because of this study result, institutions are reaching out to these folks that either say that environmental attentiveness is very important or strongly important to their decision to apply and attend, and trying to get at them during that prospective student tour. And I agree. I think that probably about a quarter of the population will find that interesting and let it impact their decision. But what's intractable, what's hard to get at in this, is maybe this other 75% of the pie, where these folks are saying it either only matters a little bit, this environmental commitment, or not at all. This might be disheartening. Say, okay, some of the students, it really is not going to affect their decision no matter how good my program is. But that's not the truth, because one of the areas where sustainability professionals can have a great impact is in advocating for institutions to take care of their existing aging buildings. Many of you who are signed up for today's webinar also attended our January webinar on the 2016 State of Sustainability Report, or read the report when it was available online. And you'll remember that one of the key takeaways here was that there is, without a doubt, a rock solid environmental argument to be made that your existing buildings, renovating them, resetting the clock on them, and taking good care of those buildings is the most critical thing you can do as a sustainability professional. The best way that you can limit the environmental impact of your campus operations. I look at it like I consider sustainability in my own lifestyle. So I often think back to my grandmother, who was one of the most sustainable people that I ever spent time with, the way she lived her life. What's funny is that she would have never used the word sustainability. She just took care of things because you should take care of things. She reupholstered her sofa when it needed to be reupholstered. She didn't put it out on the curb. She didn't buy more than she needed. Her whole house could be cleaned out in a morning because she had only accumulated what she needed in life. So one of the key messages that has really emerged from the data in the last 2 years of these nationwide analyses is that we need to do the same as facilities managers, as stewards for our campuses. We need to take care of the buildings that are already there, really invest our time, resources, and manpower into them to reset the clock and have them perform at a better functionality. And we need to limit how many of these new buildings we're building on campus. I won't go into the data from the environmental perspective today because that was covered in that report, but I wanted to remind you of this because today we're going to talk about the influence this has on the reputation of the campus, taking care of these existing buildings, and on winning over new prospective students. So every year I walk many campuses, some of which have buildings that look like this on the right, beautiful, pristine, well cared for, recently renovated, really maintaining the integrity of that structure. And a lot of buildings that look like this. The deferred maintenance is piling up and you can start to see it. What you often probably don't think about is that this influence, this look at the buildings on campus, really impacts prospective students' decisions about attending. So 71% of high school juniors and seniors say that the most trusted source of information is actually doing a campus visit. It's coming, walking campus. 63% of those first-year students say that part of my decision-making process was in looking at the appearance of the institution. That visual appearance, it matters. And an institution that took this to heart, a group of institutions from the University of Maine system, when they really focused on renovating and upgrading their facilities, their existing facilities, they actually saw a bump in freshman enrollment of 10%. So there's measurable impact to be had, not just from a sustainability perspective when you take care of your existing buildings, but also from this recruitment perspective. Now, from a reputational standpoint, one of the key factors that influences the reputation of an institution is how that institution's alumni and students speak about it, share information about it on social media, etc. So one of the areas that we've started to dive into in our research is in looking at user satisfaction on campus. Because if a user is satisfied, that means they're out perpetuating and spreading positive reputational information about your institution. From a facilities perspective, we start to think about what affects an occupant's satisfaction. What leads to a good experience for this occupant? And each year for many of our member institutions, we actually survey their satisfaction related to the building that they spend the most time in. So for instance, we can break down this data into categories. This dark blue are the responses of individuals who spend the majority of their time in a recently renovated building or one constructed in the last 10 years. So these folks have had their building reset and it's behaving like a young building. Over here in gray, these are occupants of buildings that really have not had substantial investment into them in the last 50 years. And what you see, when you look at this score that's always out of 5 points, that recently renovated buildings are scoring kind of like a B on campus at 83%, 82%, 80%. But buildings that have not been invested into, buildings where we're not taking the care to really retain and manage that asset over time, are scoring in the ranges of 64%, 66%. So your buildings that have been reset, where you've spent some resources to really take care and renovate those facilities, are scoring a B on campus. But your buildings that have not been reset, where there hasn't been a large investment over time to maintain and upkeep them, are getting an F score from their users. Think about what that does to your campus reputation. If the majority of your buildings on campus have not been recently reset, your users recognize it. They see that the building has not been maintained in the condition that's ideal, and they're out there spreading this information to potential prospective students who visit campus or who they interact with in the community. You can see the same thing on occupant comfort. So these are measures of, is the temperature comfortable? Is the air quality good? Is my building free of undesirable odors? Is it free of distracting noises? And time and again, what you see is that the buildings that were renovated, that have had investment in the last 10 years, where there's been a focus on maintaining that asset, are scoring significantly higher than those that have not had a major infusion of maintenance work done in the recent past. So to end our conversation here, because I want to save a few minutes for questions at the end, I want to think about a call to action. So I mentioned at the beginning of this that I've spent a lot of this summer really thinking about this idea of finding win-wins, places where the issues that alarm sustainability professionals can overlap with the issues that alarm business officers, and how you can implement projects and strategies that are a win-win for all around. Who else can we think about? What other key coalitions do you need to build on campus when you're trying to implement sustainability projects? And can we start to tackle some of these other key factors that impact how students select an institution that they're going to attend, like the academic program, job prospects, or graduate success? Many of the sustainability professionals that we work with in higher education have responsibilities that cross out of operations and move into the academic and employment realm, where you're really having an impact on what students learn while they're at that institution and the job prospects that they might have into the future. So, call to action for the day is to think a little bit about how you can shift out of your bubble of alarm, the things that worry you, and think about how those possible coalition partners are facing their own issues of alarm, whether it be being alarmed about the enrollment decline, being alarmed about the debt ceiling, being alarmed about the failing academic programs, and how can the programs and initiatives that would help your sustainability process also help these folks move their agenda forward. I think shifting that perspective is just really critical to both making the case for why sustainability is so impactful on campus, but also for moving the dial and changing the impact that we have as sustainability professionals. So with that, I'm going to hand the conversation back to Eric, who's been tracking your questions and comments throughout the presentation, so he can moderate for us.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Heather. Well, that does wrap up the content of today's session. So let's get right to the questions, because we do have a few of them. The first one, Heather, I don't recall if you addressed this during the presentation, but somebody did ask how difficult is it to register university buildings under LEED O&M? Heather, you still there?
I apologize. I had muted myself inadvertently. I'm over here talking to myself. That's a great question about LEED O&M buildings. So recently, USGBC has made a special push to make the process easier for registering and certifying buildings under LEED operations and maintenance. The reason for that is because there have been very few projects in higher ed that have gone that route. A lot of institutions were saying it's a little bit too costly, there's too much paperwork, it's too onerous. So what USGBC has done has provided a campus level solution where you can achieve many of the credits at the campus level. For instance, the transportation and site credits, go after those credits one time, document the point earning for the entire campus, and then any buildings that you want to bring in under LEED, you just have to show the outcomes of the building specific credits. So it's a way that they're trying to streamline it so institutions can basically certify in bulk. If they do 5 renovations in 1 year and want to go after LEED O&M for all of them, it makes the process a little bit smoother.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question here, as universities face budget cuts, what are your thoughts on administration planning to demolish buildings to save costs on operational costs? Do you think that has a greater environmental impact in terms of carbon, and would that take away from carbon neutrality goals, or how would that impact those goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And with the decreases in enrollment that we've been talking about today, it's a very real issue. I actually work with a few institutions that have had such significant enrollment declines that they have ghost buildings on campus that are still standing and have not been occupied for a significant amount of time because they don't have the money to bring them down. So we've been working to build the business case for funding those demolitions. First of all, from an aesthetic perspective, it really impacts your campus tour when you've got abandoned buildings on campus. But also from a very practical perspective. So many campuses have not yet closed down a building, but don't in fact need it, because as their enrollment declines, classroom utilization really sinks. So you might have a building that's open and it's being conditioned 12 months out of the year, but being used for 4 classes a week and 2 or 5 offices. And there's so much opportunity for condensing these functions. So in our last report for State of Sustainability, we talked a little bit about the environmental impact of demolition. It does have a one-time kind of carbon release associated with taking down a building and releasing all those materials. But the payback is there very, very quickly from an environmental perspective because you save on all the future operating costs once you bring that building offline. And my colleagues in the sustainability specialist role here at Sightlines, and I often talk about the impact that our space utilization studies have, that there's actually a better environmental impact with convincing someone not to build a new building or to take an old building down than there is from a lot of the other conversations that we have, because a single building has this lifelong legacy for decades and decades of resource consumption.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Looks like we have another question coming in here. Is it worth acquiescing to a more modest investment in a sustainable change if campus officials agree to it, even when that sustainable change is not, quote unquote, enough of an impact given the urgency of climate change? And really, in other words, how to deal with a series of modest changes inadvertently serving as a campus being proud enough of those changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really tough. I really like that question because from an optimistic personal perspective, I think every win should be counted as a win. So even if it's only impacting your emissions profile an eensy bit, but otherwise makes perfect sense from a business perspective, absolutely you should encourage that because a series of those wins over a decade really amounts to something. Decisions are slow in higher ed. It's very unlikely that sustainability professionals will have huge wins on a regular ongoing basis. It's a lot of little small wins followed by an occasional big win. So accepting those patterns will help with your mental sanity, of course, but also finding ways along the path to keep pushing folks forward and to show them opportunities that they're missing, I think is really key. So you celebrate the little successes. You say, yeah, you gave us funding for this, and you see it had this little impact. Now imagine if you had given us 5 times that much funding. We could actually have 10 times the impact. putting the data in front of folks so that you build off of the small wins into bigger things, I think is the secret to success.
All right, thanks, Heather. Well, that appears to be it for now, but we do have a few more minutes. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to continue submitting those now. While we wait for more questions to trickle in, I'd just like to let you know that each of you will be receiving a post-webinar survey at the conclusion of today's session. It's a short survey that should probably only take about a minute or two to complete, and it's designed to not only get your thoughts on the content of today's presentation, but to also get a sense of the challenges that you face on campus, and with those in mind, what topics you'd like to hear from us at future events and in future reports. It goes without saying that we'd really love to hear from you. I'd also like to make sure that I encourage you all to visit the Sightlines website and our Insights page specifically if you'd like to stay current with relevant industry trends or any of the latest best practices or innovative solutions that we're sharing. Insights is your resource to easily access industry knowledge from both Sightlines and our member institutions. There you'll find blog posts, reports, guides, on-demand webinars where this session will be located, and more information on any upcoming events that we have planned. You'll also have the opportunity to sign up for exclusive content there from Sightlines. So please be sure to check that out from time to time as we frequently update this page with new information. Let me see if we do have anything coming in. It doesn't look like it. So it looks like we have addressed all questions that have been submitted so far. So I'd like to, again, thank you all for joining us today. And I hope that you enjoyed the session and found the information valuable as you continue to explore ways to transform your sustainability strategy and really create a new facilities conversation on your campus. Please don't hesitate to contact us via our website, sightlines.com, or directly at insights@sightlines.com if you have any additional questions. Thank you again, and a big thank you to Heather, and I hope you all have a great day.